started. Yes, champion. I have a bad habit of not pressing the button. So we're going to be covering a lot of information very quickly because there's a lot of information to get through, and I'm trying to do a semi-impossible task in 45 minutes. But let's try our best, and let's just go with it. Hello, everyone.
Sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine. I was just doing a quick introduction. And the module that we're going to be making is called Capable, because I believe everyone is capable of making their own module. It might not be the fanciest, most pretty thing, but you can get it working, and everyone can get it working. It's possible, and I believe in you. So, my name is Lindsay Gaudinier, and I work at Hook 42, and this is Drupal 8 Custom Module Architecture, and what the heck is going on. A little bit about me. I'm a developer at Hook 42. I love swimming, I love cats, and I love the internet. And that is the love of my life, dude. He's a super dork, and I miss him so much. Okay, a little bit about the thought behind the talk. I had to create a custom module for the first time, and before I'd only modified code. I'd touched Drupal 8 a lot, but I never actually started from the ground up. So I was terrified, and I was just like, just internal screaming. And I got it working, but I didn't want to just know how to make it. I wanted to know why certain things needed to go where, why is this in this file? A little bit of the understanding, so I wasn't just plunking in code in certain areas and praying to the code gods that the computer didn't explode. So a quick note, sometimes words are mentioned before they're defined. Please have patience. There's one of me, and there's a lot of topics in this talk, so I can't define everything all at once. The first question you need to ask yourself is, do you even need a custom module? There's a lot of contrib modules out there. They get security releases, and they get a lot of different eyeballs on them. So you have the full weight of the Drupal community behind you. However, you might have a unique problem that contrib just doesn't solve. You might need a specific thing that contrib just hasn't made. Hello. The contrib module that you found might be too bulky, and it might hurt performance. It might be doing a lot of things, and you only need it to do one thing. So you can leverage a contrib module and take some of that code, but you might not want all of it. And you can also bring in many contrib modules into one custom module and kind of pick and choose what you want. So that way you have only what you need, and you don't have all this code that's hurting your performance. That's fine, this is on my local. So nothing's ever easy in Drupal. If you're new to Drupal, welcome. You can't just start with a list of files and start plugging away and starting code. We need to go through some vocab and understand some of the things that are making up Drupal 8. And one of them is called PSR4, Improved Auto Loading. PSR stands for PHP Standard Recommendation. This is published by the PHP Fig group, and their focus is to move PHP forward. And Drupal 8 implements the standard for namespacing and auto loading. And I'm going to give you some definitions that make no sense. PSR4 is autoloaders remove the complexity of including files by mapping namespaces to file system paths. That's great. I don't know what the heck that means. So in English, autoloading is just the capability of loading and linking portions of a program automatically when needed. So the autoloader searches through a path of directories and finds the code that defines a subroutine or the method function you want to use. And it just means that your code doesn't need to include a long list of source files in your PHP file. And this magic works because you leverage something called namespacing. Namespaces are commonly structured as different hierarchies to allow reuse of names in different contexts. So what it does is it helps you avoid name collisions if you repeat the same name for a function class that was declared before, and it eliminates the need for very super long, complicated, specific class names, because all you have to do is point to where that code is, and it's like, oh, okay, you meant this function. Another quick summary that we need to go over is Composer, and this is a dependency package manager, which is just software that automates your upgrading and your configuration and removing software, and in theory it's wonderful. So Composer is a dependency manager for PHP, and it just helps you get all of the packages that you might need for your site, and it ensures that you have the correct versions, and it does a lot of things automatically, because that would be a pain in the butt to have to deal with that outside of Composer. And then we also are leveraging Symfony in Drupal 8. Symfony is a PHP framework, and it's a set of reusable PHP components and libraries. It's an MVC framework, and the components are standalone PHP libraries that generate specific features. I'm not going to be able to go through Symfony components very in depth, but the more and more you create custom modules, the more these things will pop up, and they'll make more sense, and you'll leverage them more. So it's just good to know what the Symfony components are in Drupal. And that's like my quick summation. The Symfony documentation is actually really good, and I recommend you go to their site and look at it. So why do I care, Lindsay? I just want to make a module. Because auto-loading and namespacing are actually super important, and they come into when you make how you structure files and code in your module. They're that why, and why does this get this line here in your module. And Drupal core uses Composer, but you can also manage dependencies for your custom module with Composer. And the Symfony framework is also used in Drupal 8. So all those words will pop up at some point. They might not in your first module or your second module, but when you get better and better at it, you can incorporate more components. Okay, now we can go to the types of files. This is not a full list. The more complicated your module gets, the more types of files you can put in, but this is a quick summary of basic files. There's YAML, there's PHP, there's Markdown, there's JavaScript object notation, which is JSON, .module, which is a PHP file, JavaScript, and CSS. Okay, so cool. We've got our background. Now we can name our module. We want to make sure we start with a letter. We use only lowercase letters and underscores. We have no spaces. We have a unique name. And please don't call your module Drupal. I'm pretty sure the internet will explode if you try to put that on a website. I don't know what's going to happen, but it's a reserved word. And there's a lot of reserved words, which I actually found out one while I was making my custom module, because things just broke. So if things just break, it might be the word you're choosing. Okay, now we're going to look at that skeleton. That is a giant list of files. When you're making your module, please don't have all these files in your module. You're trying to do too much. But this is just an example of all the things that a custom module can do. There's a lot of potential here. There's a lot of work, and there's also more files that can be in there. You can have a butt ton more PHP files. You can have more services. It can get even more ginormous, but you want to focus a module. The module I made is more trying to be broad and touch on everything. In actuality, that's a bad idea. Don't do that, please. Okay, now we're going to start going into the files themselves. The capable.info.yaml file. This is the info.yaml file, and it lives in your root folder, and it tells Drupal about your module. The information can be found when you go to your admin pages. And technically, this is the only required file, but if you put nothing else in your module is not going to do anything. This essentially just tells Drupal that your module exists and you can enable it, but if you have no code behind it, nothing's going to happen. And here's a more complete example. We have the list we can add dependencies to our module, and these are modules that your module depends on, so you can't enable your module until you've downloaded the other dependencies. The namespacing this is our first example of namespacing. When you give your dependency, you have to do it in this specific way so Drupal knows what you're talking about. We also have, there's a little bit more information. You can list any dependencies you have for tests that are run in your module, any configuration information. You can define the minimum PHP version, and you can do something called hidden, which I've commented out. But if you don't trust people and you think they're going to disable your module, you can make it so it doesn't show up on the admin page for modules. So if you have like a testing module, or if you have some fun content editors that like to break things, that's a good idea, possibly. Okay, it's starting now. This is where it starts to get fun. We're going into the controller file. So this leverages PSR4, and the controller file lives inside a folder called SRC, and then in a folder called controller. I don't know why it's capitalized, but it is for some reason on all the examples I've seen. I can't tell you why. It might work not being capitalized. Go experiment. SRC stands for source, and that is just a quick screenshot of where it lives. And you have to declare a namespace at the top of the file, and the namespace format looks like that. And the controller file works very close with the router file. And so here's an example of our CapableController.php file. We have our namespace up here. It's just a simple line. We're leveraging the controller base, so we're going to extend that in our function. And then we have this public function of content, which just returns some markup that's just your modules working. And there's you might run into rules with namespacing with it not formatted correctly. So if everything's broken, just take a step back and make sure that everything is how it needs to be. You're giving it the right path. Everything has the right names, because it probably will happen, because it's happened to me numerous times. And then I just want you to take note of this public function is called content, because that will come back up. We're going to go into the routing file. A route is just a path where Drupal returns some sort of content, and the router determines when code should be run to generate this response. The routing system is responsible for matching paths to controller. So when a user hits a specific web page, it will fire off something that does something with the controller. Okay. Sorry, guys. And your router file lives in the root of your module. And there's an example of a routing file. This throughout the presentation, this routing file is going to get longer and longer. This is the first example, and it's for when you hit the path hello, we're going to fire off the controller content. That was that function we just created, and we're going to give it the page title if you did it, and we set a permission of access content. So they're going to work together. We have our path, we have our function name right there with the namespacing of the controller, and we have our title, and we have that function that lives in our controller that we're calling in our routing. And then we have the user hit the hello page and everything works, which is wonderful. When everything works, it's beautiful. You can do something called parameters and routes, and these are used for URLs that contain dynamic values. For example, if the user would do parameters / anything, that anything would go into the parameters. So parameters / hello and goodbye both work. This partial element is called a slug, and it's available as a partial in the controller method. And you can also have multiple parameters. So if you're doing like a product and then a product number and then a color. I'll show you examples. It's a lot of information. So we have, can you guys see that? Yeah. Okay. This is the second case in the routing file that we're going to look at. You hit the parameters, we have our slug. So that's essentially just a variable that's standing in for whatever URL they put. And then we're going to fire off this function called parameters, which lives in our capable controller file. And this is just going to return that slug, the URL, the second part of the URL that's dynamic in the markup. So it looks like that. And so anything they put after parameters will pop up on the page.
Previous like access underscore config and access.
I will go into that. Yeah. There's also a module menu link, and this is a link in the module development section of the admin config. And this also lives in the root of your module. And what we have to do is we have to connect our capable.links.menu YAML with our routing file, with our controlling file. So everything's talking to each other. It's just important to know why it's talking to each other and in what order. So we're going to make our that capable.links.menu.yaml file. We're going to give it a title, just some text. In this case, because we're leveraging module menu links, we have to give it that parent, and we're going to give it a route name, which is in the routing file. That's the route name we gave it of capable.config. And we're going to give it a weight to where it lives on the page. In the routing file, we've named it capable.config so that capable.links.menu can find that route, and then we give it a path. So the link on the page will go to that path. So it's a little different. It's not the user goes to this page. The user goes to I'll show you screenshots, but the user goes to the link that then goes to this path. And then this fires off the controller of config settings page. This was initially called configs, and I believe that's a reserved word, and it broke things. So that's an example of reserved words coming up to bite you in the butt. And then we have our CapableController.php, and this just returns in the associated function that these are the configuration settings for the Capable module. So in actuality, how this works is your user goes to admin/config, and they have a configuration link, and then that link we got is the link we set in the routing file right there. It's a little convoluted, but in actuality, it would be a real link that would go to a help page. And you can set up to external links or internal links. So there's just a lot of flexibility with that. We're also going to run into a file called the capable.module file. And this file is optional, but it's very powerful. It's used for implementing hooks. And there's Buster. A quick introduction to hooks, just in case you've never heard about it. Hooking is a range of techniques that lets you change the behavior of applications by intercepting events passed between software components. And the hook is just the code that intercepts that handles this interception. Hooks in Drupal let modules interact with other modules and Drupal core. And hooks are kind of like event listeners, and they fire off when certain events trigger them, and they can be used at various execution points. In Drupal 8 from Drupal 7, some hooks have stayed the same, some have changed, and some have been deleted, so you just need to refresh your knowledge. And to implement a hook, you need to replace the hook name of the function with the name of your module. So this is a simple one. For hook help, you would just change it to capable help. So the hooks live in the capable.module file. And this also lives in your root, and hope you guys can see that. So I'm just leveraging that hook help module, or that hook help, and I'm instead doing it capable help. So I'm editing the capable modules help page with this hook. And I'm just saying, look, your hook's working. It's not very helpful, but it's just to make sure everything's connecting and talking. And then if you go to admin help and then capable, it prints up. A little bit about Composer. This was done last night, so I apologize if there's any typos. If your module has a dependency to a third party hosted on packages, you can define this dependency with Composer. You must absolutely declare dependencies in your .info.yaml file. That has to happen. But you can also declare them in your composer.json file, and you can get more specific. So that's where Composer is very helpful, because you can get really nitty-gritty on what version of something you want to use. If your module doesn't have any dependencies, you don't have to do a Composer, and it's not a required file. The info.yaml has to have it. It has to have those dependencies, but adding it will not have any negative effect on your module. And Drupal core will not automatically find your custom module composer.json, so you have to tell it that it lives there. So this is how you're going to tell it that it lives. This is the way I've got working. I've tried many other ways. Composer's fun. Please, if you find another way, share it with the community. Help everyone out. The way I found is in your root Composer, because you should have a Composer file in the root of your website. You need to run Composer acquire, and then you need to get something called Wikimedia Composer merge plugin. And then you need to edit your root Composer file. You need to make sure you have this require, and you need to give it the path of modules custom, your module name, and then that composer.json file. And then you also need to make sure you have that installer path section. I've had some Drupal 8 instances where I've had to add that, and I've had others where it already exists, so it might come with the newest version. I'm not sure, but just make sure you have that, what you need for modules and custom modules. So now we're going to create our custom module composer file. This also lives in the root of our module. And this is a very, very simple one. I am following a very bad practice, because if you notice, my info.yaml file doesn't actually have any dependencies, and I'm declaring a dependency in my composer file. That's bad. Don't follow my example. I just needed to make sure that my composer was working, so I made it hook something up. So don't do this. Don't follow my example. But it's just a simple composer file, and I'm requiring the devel module. These can get very complicated, and there's a lot, they can get really finicky with how you write them. So please read Composer documentation for how to structure your files. And then you need to run Composer update on your root Composer file, and then that will hopefully find your custom module Composer. Seriously. And install any dependencies and know what that custom module needs to be working and happy. Okay, forms. Forms are a great thing. We like to collect information. That's a link to the form API in case you're not, you don't know it very well. And just an API is an application programming interface that gives you a set of functions and tools for building software with clearly defined methods of communication. And the first step to creating forms in your custom module is to identify the type of form you need. There are 3 types of forms to leverage. There's a general form, there's a config form that lets administrators update a module settings, and then there's another config form that just has an extra step that says, "Are you sure?" And there are 4 required methods that need to go with your form. You need to get form ID, you need to build the form, you need to validate the form, and you need to submit the form. And all this information is in the form API. So if you want to leverage this, I recommend reading all about the form API. And then here's an example of how to set that up. I have my capable.form in my routing file. It's already getting bigger from that first example. I'm giving it the path of when the user hits capable form. And the form, instead of the default calling a controller, it's now calling a form. And we're giving it the namespace of Drupal capable form, which lives right here. And then we're giving it the title, and we're giving it some permissions. If you see, the form lives under your SRC file, and then under form. Once again, I don't know why it's capitalized, but every example I've seen is. And then we're going to call it capableform.php. And then we're giving it that namespace at the top. We're going to leverage the form base, so we're leveraging the most basic type of form. And we also have to use form state interface. I don't remember why, but it's all in form API, so you have to read on that to leverage it. And then we have our beautiful form that shows up when the user goes to capable/form or /form. A little bit about configuration. Configuration is a place to store information you'd like to synchronize from dev to production and through all your environments. This information can be used in your plugins, entities, and settings. It lives under a config file, under a config directory. Under that config directory, there's 2 subdirectories. There's the install directory and the schema directory. The install directory holds your defaults in a capable.settings.yaml file. And your schema is how you organize this data that you defined in your capable.settings.yaml file. And schema, if you didn't know, is just the organization of the structure of the database. And here's just a super simple example. I've created a config that it just has a message, a language code, and an alternate message. And then I have set a very simple schema of it having just the message is type text and it is label message. And you have to import this config for it to be seen by the database. Your website won't magically see it. You have to do some config imports to see this. But once you import it, then you can see that in your database and you can leverage it that way. So there's the example of it in config and then capable.settings. Okay. This is a lot of information, I know, but you guys are doing so great. We're all capable of doing this. So what we're going to do is we're going to leverage that config that we just set, and we're going to just print it out to make sure everything's talking to everything. We have our path, which is when you go to module /configs. We're going to call the controller of module configs, and let's take a look at it. We have module configs on the right, and we have to pull in configs this way. That's our name of our configuration, and we're pulling in the name of the labels, and then we're going to output it into some markup. So it's pretty simple. It's not super fancy, but it's just making sure everything's talking to everything. And then there we have our page that we are reading the configs that we have uploaded from our module into the database. Okay, permissions. We got there eventually. Permissions are defined in capable.permissions.yaml. In D7, you used hook permissions. It has its own file now. There are static permissions that do not depend on system information, and there are dynamic permissions, and these are generated by site-specific information. I actually took out the dynamic part of this talk because it's already too long. And this lives in the root of your module file. And just an example of a static permission is, this is an edit permission, and you can edit and then you have your description, and you can set restrict access to false or to true, and one of them gives you that warning and one of them doesn't, and I don't remember because there's too many slides and my brain is only so big. You can also set these permissions in routing if you've noticed this. So you can create a custom permission and then assign that permission to a route, so only users with that permission can hit that route. See, it all interconnects. It's just a lot of information. So in this case, anyone who has the edit permissions permission can hit that hello page. Services. A service is just a really good way to organize some code. Okay, so it's gonna seem more complicated, but if you have a very ginormous code base, this is a good way to split things up and clean up your code. And a service is just any reusable PHP object that does something. It's managed by the services container, and it performs operations like accessing the database, sending email, or translating UI text. And this lives under your module name services.yaml, and it lives in the root of your module. And it's going to talk to another file that lives under source. And this is also going to talk with routing, and it's also going to talk with controlling with the controller. So this one gets a little convoluted, but you can get through it. So we have our service. We're going to call it say hello, and this lives in capable.services.yaml. And we also have our capable services PHP, so we can just separate that code out from our controller, so our controller is not the biggest, most ginormous file in the universe. And this is, we're going to give it the namespace. We're just going to do a little function that says hello. We have to do a construct, and then we're going to just return hello, and then if you give it a variable, it returns hello plus that variable. So what we have to do is we have to connect these two files that we just created with routing and with our controller. So when they hit the path module./services, we're going to call services example, which is in our controller. And in our controller, we're going to pull in that services code in here. So that's going to pull in capable say hello, which tells us to go to here. And then that's going to pull in that function, and then you can give that function a variable, and then it prints out in the most convoluted way possible, hello friend. You could possibly just make a content type. That would be the realistic thing in this case, but it's a great way to organize code. So if you're using functions and you're possibly passing in variables in different ways, that you can organize it differently. So services in this example seems convoluted and unnecessary, but if your module gets big, it's a great way to organize code. Okay, a quick thing on plugins and custom blocks. Plugins are small pieces of functionality that are swappable, and plugins that perform similar functionality are of the same plugin type. Blocks are instances of the block plugin, and there's 3 types of plugins. There's blocks, field formatters, and field widgets, and views, and they live under those respected directories. So in this case, we're going to leverage block. If we were leveraging something that had to do with field, we'd put it in a field directory, and the same with views. And we're just creating a simple block that says, look at this beautiful custom block, and it just extends block base. We have to give it this namespace, and then when you go to add a block in admin structure block, then it shows up in that list. Okay, guys, we've done through so much. Okay, I know your brains are hurting, but you're doing so great. Now we get to go to the fun part, which is module theming. These are things you actually get to see. A good part, something important to know about module theming is libraries. A library is a collection of implementations of behavior that has a well-defined interface by which the behavior is invoked. You can define one or more libraries, also known as assets, you might run into that word, in your module name.libraries.yaml. And you have to explicitly tell Drupal the libraries you want to load. CSS will not load on a page unless you say, I want this CSS on this page. And the same thing with JavaScript. It's to help with performance because you don't need everything loading on every page if you're not actually leveraging it. And D8 no longer loads jQuery on all pages on default. So you have to tell Drupal that if you have a JavaScript file that uses jQuery, you have to tell it that that's a dependency. And there's many ways to attach the library to the page. And I'll go over all those. Okay, example, capable.libraries.yaml. We have it lives under our root in our module. In this case, we have 4 separate libraries. We have something called main, which has 2 CSS files and a JavaScript file, which has a dependency on jQuery. We have a form, we have a template, and we have a miscellaneous. I wouldn't really recommend naming your libraries like this, but I tried to go with simple for the presentation. And then the CSS that is being defined in your libraries lives under capable, and then the directory CSS, and then the JavaScript lives under a JavaScript directory. You can load a library in 5 different ways. You can use a hook element info alter, a render array, a hook page attachments, a template pre-process hook, and you can attach it to the twig template, and I will go through these. Just if you've worked with D7, add CSS, add JS, and Drupal add library have all been, they might exist, but you're not supposed to use them, and they've been replaced, so probably don't use them. How to globally load a library, so if there is if you do need some styling on every single page, you would load it with this hook. This is hook page attachments, and the examples that I found online actually checked for like a URL or something, so they didn't even load on every page. So I hacked this a little bit to make sure it loaded on every single page, and you just have to attach that library, the one that we called main, to the page, and that will load that library on every single page. And then if you go to any page on your example site with this module, then you can see that that very beautiful purple background is on all of the main content. You can also load a library to a form, so you can just make form styling, and you attach this in your render array in the form. In this case, in one of those 4 functions we needed to build our form, we can add it to build form, and we just give it the name of that library and we attach it to the form. And then you can check that it's working in the form. And you can load a library to a specific element. So in this case, like a select list, I loaded it to that one. And this is just a super beautiful, just, it's gonna destroy your minds when you see it. And it's just checking for that, that type. And then when it finds select, it's gonna attach that library to that type. And just, it's so beautiful, you guys. It's wonderful. So that's attaching that to the select type, and if that type doesn't exist on the page that the user is going to, that library won't load, so it's good for performance. And you can also load a library to a twig template. You do this with attached library, and then your module name, and then the library name. And you can check that it loaded by inspecting. And just some quick information on CSS. All styles should be placed under the CSS folder, and Drupal 8 follows SMAC's style categorization of its CSS rules, and that goes into when you're, I'm gonna go back for half a second. So that lives like right here, the theme and the state, that's where that pops up. Sorry if I gave anyone vertigo. And that assigns it different weights and how it loads. And then there's CSS file organization. I did not follow this. I'm sorry. I wanted to do it as simple as possible, but there's certain ways you should you should name certain files according to what is happening in that CSS. So if it's super important to the module and it just makes the module like work, then you need to put it in the .module.css and so on and so forth. And CSS weights are just like I showed you. So this is, we're leveraging template right here, and this is state, and state is a little bit before our theme. So it's just how you make one CSS file load before the other. A little bit about JavaScript. If you haven't used jQuery, it's wonderful. It's very fun. It's a fast, small, and feature-rich JavaScript library. As opposed to D7, JavaScript does not load on all pages on D8, so you have to explicitly load it. Here's an example of our main.js file, which is just loading the page that they've gone to, the URL, and then it adds a little styling. And when we declare that file in our library, we have to tell it that it has a dependency on jQuery, and the other dependency I will go into next. So that's just it working in the live. And configure JavaScript is if you need JavaScript to talk to some PHP information that's from your site. You need to also declare that dependency on Drupal settings, which was the second dependency that was under core jQuery. And then you need to also attach Drupal settings to your form that you're using. In this case, I'm attaching it to the form, and I'm giving it an example variable. So I'm creating a PHP element of an example variable in the form, and then in the JavaScript, I'm accessing that PHP variable and I'm pulling it in. So that way you are not restricted to whatever variables are defined in JavaScript, so the server can talk to the client. And there's just an example. It's pulling in your user ID, and it's pulling in that PHP variable that was defined in the form. And then I haven't got this working, but there's a lot of people that are going to leverage externally hosted libraries like React or Angular. So this is an example of how to do it. I don't know if this is a good example. I haven't actually tested it, but that would be how you would declare a library that is externally hosted. Twig templates, this is how you would make your custom pages. Twig is a flexible templating engine for PHP, and it helps you make those custom pages. These HTML.twig files have replaced the tipple.php files of D7, and this lives under a templates folder. Once again, this one's lowercase. I don't know why, but it is. Let's go into the steps to create a Twig template for your custom module. You need to define the hook theme in your .module file. You need to call the template, and then you need to create the Twig template in this folder. So first we have to define a hook theme. We're going to do capable underscore theme, and then we're going to give it the theme of welcome page, and we're going to use a template called welcome, and then we're going to return it. This is a hook in our module file because that's where hooks live. And then we're going to call this template in our controller and in our routing file because those two files love each other. We're going to name this function welcome, and we're just going to return a theme called the welcome page. And then in our routing file, when the user hits the page welcome, we're going to call this controller welcome, and it's going to pull that theme. And it all works because you have created a template called welcome. So naming matters, because if it's welcomes, it's not going to work. So make sure if you have something that's not working, triple check that all the files are correctly named, because it's possible there's a typo or there's something that's snuck in that's making it not know the path it needs to go to. So we have our beautiful template file, which is just some ipsum, and then we attach that library at the top. And then last but not least, we're going to go into testing very quickly. You can QA your module to make sure it's working with test run by Drupal, and test live under the test, once again, lowercase, I don't know why, /src folder, and then under its relative folder, depending on what type of test it is. There's 3 main types of tests. There's unit tests, and these are on functions and methods, and there are kernel tests. These are on components. And then there's functional tests, which are on the complete system. And this actually spins up an instance of Drupal and tests there. So it's pretty performance heavy. So, and also I didn't get any functional tests working. So I, for my example, did a unit test because that one works. So we have it living under test, src, and then unit, and then I named it capable example test.php, and then there's just a super simple test. We've given it the namespace. We're using the core unit test case, and we're just extending that, and it essentially just does a small little thing to make sure it's working. And then to run the test, you have to enable the testing module, which comes with core. You need to navigate to admin config development testing, which is right there. You need to find your test. When you make your test, there's this little section that's going to be in code, and that's going to be where it lives on the list of tests. So it's easier to find if you give it a group. So that's why that's under capable. You select the group name, you click the test you want to run, and hopefully it turns out green and not red, because red's a bad color. There are also many documentation files that go into a custom module. There's a README, a standards, a testing, and a capable API.php. I think it's good to document things. It's good to write things down because accidents happen. You forget you didn't have enough coffee. Life is hard. So make sure you write things down and you document it. And in case your module is just the most amazing thing ever and you want to share it with and make it a contrib module, these are pretty required and they're very helpful. So it's good to just have them from the get-go. And then these are the things I really wanted to get to, but I didn't have time, and I didn't get to go into tasks. And these are, they generate tabs on the top of pages, and they're usually admin pages, and entities, which is another way to store content and config information. And then this is not even close to all the sources. The biggest thing I'd say to get to really understand and grok how custom modules work is to go to the example modules, or to take my module and take it apart and break it and try to fix it. The best way to do it is to try to build it on your own from the start up. There's no time for questions, but any questions? Yes. Is that a question? Oh, never mind. Okay. Cool. Thank you guys very much. And then all these slides and the link to the module where all those screenshots are from is up on GitHub.
And are you going to link to put a link on your session page?
It's already on there. Thank you. I hope you learned something.